Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Recently, finally, we're starting to get a decent public policy debate on housing affordability. As viewers of Boom and Bust know, we have been covering this for quite a while. Back to discuss is David Clement. He's no relation, but he is the North American Affairs Manager of the Consumer Choice Center. Welcome back, David.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I guess the first thing is give us your take on the state of housing affordability in Canada at present.
Yeah, I mean, it is really uncomfortable out there for people, young people predominantly, millennials looking to enter the market like myself. If we look at what the last 10 or 12 months has brought us, we're looking at record price increases month over month in many markets for 6, 7+ months in a row.
Right.
And this isn't just on the home buying side, it's also on the rental side, because obviously this has an impact on renting. And so, for example, a two-bedroom apartment in the city of Toronto requires an annual income of about $118,000. That is nowhere near what the average family income is in Toronto. And so we now have a scenario where the average home is out of reach for the average family. And I think that that's something that should resonate with politicians from across the political spectrum.
Yeah, and let's just stick on the rental side for a moment, because I've noticed that as well, that there's even a market of buying homes and then leasing them out, right? So it's not as if there's an extra supply as a result of rentals. It has an impact on the broader housing market.
Yeah, and if we look at how housing has changed since 2016, the number of housing units per capita in Canada per 1,000 people is actually down from 2016. So we have fewer homes in Canada per 1,000 people than we did not that long ago. And in Ontario, and I use Ontario as the example because obviously it's the most populous province in Canada, Ontario actually went from 403 units per 1,000 people to 398. And so we have some serious backsliding or regression in terms of building and the issue of chronic undersupply. And now really is the time for our political leaders, provincial, federal, and municipal, to figure out how we can get these homes built and
Right.
figure out how we can bring Canada on par with the rest of the G7 in regards to homes per capita.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump to that topic right away. I think that's really important. We obviously had a recent federal budget. Did it address this issue at all? And what's your take on how well or poorly they did if they did do so?
No, I don't think it did. I mean, a lot of the Liberal budget does what I would call tinkering at demand or tinkering with demand. An example would be a blind bidding ban. Economists have already explained that a seller's market produces higher prices. It doesn't matter whether you have an open auction or blind bidding. And so we have a Liberal Party that's attempting to enact policy that has the appearance of having an impact, but does very little to address the issue of chronic undersupply. And what they've announced for undersupply is a rough estimate of about 100,000 new homes. Well, Ontario alone needs 650,000 new homes just to get to the national average, and that national Canadian average is the worst in the G7.
Right. So, as you say, tinkering around the edges, nothing really new there. In this sense, though, I guess we do have a question. We've got about 30 seconds left, so maybe just start answering. We'll jump to the next segment. But
Sure.
what level of government is most responsible for where we are and who is best able to help solve it?
The local governments are by far the institutions that are at fault here. They've largely gotten us into this mess. In regards to what other levels of government can do to fix the problem, There are a lot of policy options that include tying funds to infrastructure and development and ensuring that municipalities really live up to the standard that they're supposed to in regards to making livable communities.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with David Clement, no relation. He is at Consumer Choice Center. David, just want to expand a little bit on your previous answer. You said local governments are largely responsible for the kind of the housing affordability mess we're in. Tell us a little bit more about what that means in your mind.
Well, there's this very corrosive attitude that permeates at local governments, and I think it's best described by NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. So these are the types of folks who will talk a lot about affordable housing, but when mixed density or a little higher density developments are proposed in their neighborhoods, they very aggressively lobby their local councils to stop that development. And I mean, I can think of a couple quite hilarious ones. One of them was in the Yonge and Lawrence area in Toronto, where a development that would have been 8 semi-detached units was opposed because it threatened the character of the community because it was 16 centimeters too tall and 13 centimeters too wide. So this is the type of attitude that has really captured our local city councils, and that's stalling the development process. And on top of that, our local governments are really the ones who are responsible for zoning reform.
Right.
In particular, exclusionary zoning, which is the prohibition on mixed density or higher density units existing in a neighborhood. And for most of Canada's major cities, with the exception of Montreal, about 60 to 70% of our major cities are zoned exclusively for single family units. So it's illegal to build duplexes, triplexes, or anything beyond a single home for a single family. And that really puts restrictions on where builders can build, on where people can live. Because the reason why this is such a problem in our major cities is because that is where people work, it's where people dine, it's where people shop, it's where they seek their entertainment. And so by allowing for more density, you allow for people to live closer to all of the things that they do. And that has some environmental benefits as well.
So how is that going to change, though? Because obviously the very people that want to keep the density low are the people that are voting for their local councillors. So is it the case that you have to have upper levels of government involved in this in some way?
Absolutely. I think that either the federal government or the provincial government needs to make a serious attempt at ending exclusionary zoning or at least peeling it back. And the provincial government and the federal government spend a lot of money on local infrastructure projects. I think it's completely reasonable if they are to say, hey, we will continue to provide you funding for road expansion and transit and all of those things that communities need. But you have to live up to these terms, right, and you have to meet some sort of density target. And I would suggest going further to say zoning reform is really the key answer to getting there. So yeah, I think it's appropriate for other levels of government to do this, and I think it's necessary at this point.
I noticed that in the Conservative Party of Canada leadership contest, this is starting to become, if not the major issue, certainly a major one. Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, leadership candidates Scott Aitchison and Pierre Poilievre have both talked passionately about the need to build more, and they've talked about zoning in particular.
Right.
But we've also seen in Ontario, NDP leader Andrea Horwath and Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca take their own swing at zoning reform. And so we're coming to a moment here where I feel a consensus is building. Because they know that this is really one of the main policies that millennials like myself need. If we ever want the chance or the dream to enter the housing market, there has to be some substantial change. And as our demographics are shifting as a country, we are in some senses becoming the baby boomers in terms of being vote rich.
Right.
something that we care about. This is something that we want. We want more access and more affordability in the housing sector, whether you're trying to buy or you're trying to rent.
Right. And is it coming into municipal politics? We've got municipal elections in Ontario in the fall.
I have seen very little.
Right.
The only mayor that I have seen who has expressed yes in my backyard sentiments would be the mayor of Guelph, and he deserves some credit for that. But outside of that, I do not see this permeating down to local levels of government, and that's really why the provincial government and the federal government need to step in and say enough is enough.
Right. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with David Clement, no relation. He is the North American Affairs Manager at the Consumer Choice Center. David, we were just talking off air there about the environmental impact of some of these housing choices or non-choices. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so research published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change forecasts that more compact cities could reduce urban emissions by upwards of 25%. That is a significant reduction in urban emissions just by allowing people to live closer to where they work and live closer to where they want to go to the movies or eat or have their children in daycare, any of the things that you traditionally drive for. But beyond emissions, it's also water usage. So the irrigation rates for single family homes are about 50% higher than multifamily housing units. And so at the local level or the provincial or federal level, we have politicians who very passionately care about the environment and have put forward some very bold, some very foolish, some very effective policies to deal with climate change. But there is one glooming one that's kind of staring at us in the face, and that's zoning reform. And so it really is an important topic. And it not only are we protecting the environment, we're creating a more affordable city or country for people to live in. We're welcoming more neighbors. For me, it feels like the quintessential Canadian thing to do, while at the same time generating better environmental outcomes. So for me, it really is a no-brainer.
Right, right. So it's curious that really, are we starting to see that argument being played out, or is this a relatively new aspect of the crisis?
I think that for folks like myself who have been talking about this at length, this is something that we focus on. But I don't think it has crossed over into kind of the collective political conscience of the electorate yet. It would be great to see some leadership on this, because it really is a solid justification for zoning reform.
Right.
For folks on the left who deal with NIMBY opposition or deal with the perception that development equals bad environmental outcomes, and that's certainly not the case.
Just turning over to sort of a broader issue for a second, and I think you've kind of answered this, but let me put it this way. Is this more of a demand issue or more of a supply issue?
It's a supply issue. It doesn't mean that there aren't issues with demand, but it really is a supply issue. And so, as I said, Canada ranks dead last in the G7 for housing units per 1,000 people. And I mean, those are the countries who are the easiest for us to compare ourselves to in terms of purchasing power parity and economic standards and things like that. We need to build 1.8 million new housing units to catch up to our G7 peers.
Wow.
That's how dire the situation is. So it really is a supply issue. There are some demand side questions, questions about money laundering. That's predominantly on the West Coast. There are monetary policy questions on whether Bank of Canada policy has maybe worsened housing price inflation. I think that those are all valid. But at the end of the day, the root cause of this is that we just do not have enough homes for the amount of people that we live here, that we have live here. And we don't have enough homes if we want our population to grow at all, which I think we certainly do.
And I guess exacerbated because we do have immigration totals, new immigrants every month, every year, right?
Yeah, I mean, immigration plays a role here. I think that immigration, as we currently have it, is still a exponential net benefit. I don't love when immigration is brought up by immigration restrictionists
Right.
as the root cause of the housing crisis. That is not it. That is a red herring in terms of what the problem is. But if we want to talk about immigration, let's build more homes so that it's more affordable for the immigrants who do come to Canada to make a life for themselves, to gain employment, to not spend over 40% of their income on rent or a mortgage payment. That would be, I think, what would help fuel economic growth in this country, help us really lean on the economic benefits of immigration while bringing prices down for those Canadians who've been here for a long time and those who are new Canadians.
We're going to take a brief break. We'll be back with our guest after that. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with David Clement, no relation. He is the North American Affairs Manager at Consumer Choice Center. David, I just want to wrap up the program in our final segment here. Just give us, I know you've been talking about it through the whole interview, but maybe just give us the list of potential solutions, just so our audience has it clear in their minds what we have to do to make a dent in this housing shortage issue.
Yeah, so I think the first big step is to end exclusionary zoning. So end the rules that prohibit property owners from building higher density units on the same plot of land. That is step number one, because essentially, again, with Toronto as the example, 70% of the city is off limits for that type of development. And we're not talking skyscrapers and large towers. We're mostly talking about duplexes, triplexes, 8 units, things that are fairly modest, which in theory should face less resistance on the local opposition side of things. The second is upzoning near transit, which is a policy that has been put forward in California that would eliminate the building height limitations within a certain radius of public transit. I think that that's also a no-brainer. If we want to have more walkable, more livable cities, well, let's allow for people to live near transit hubs so that they don't have to rely on a car. They can walk, they can bike, they can maybe take public transit in the intermediary. Those are two policies that I think are important. They may sound radical for anyone who hasn't heard them before, but Minneapolis has eliminated exclusionary zoning.
Okay.
Oregon has eliminated exclusionary zoning for any community over 10,000 people. So this is something that is catching wind across North America, and I think it's time for some Canadian cities to jump on the train.
You notice when you travel to European cities, I'm thinking London, Paris, the main thoroughfares, you have retail on the ground level, then you have 5, 6, 7 stories of residential. And then you go to Bloor or Danforth in Toronto or Main Street, Canada, and it's maybe storefront plus 1 or 2 other floors above that. What do we do to, it looks ugly, and B, there's all that wasted space that could be residential units. What's the difference here?
Well, I think some of the difference is that the main structure for those buildings in Europe were built before zoning was a concept.
Interesting.
Because these are old cities, and I was in Strasbourg and Brussels this month, and I couldn't help but walk through these gorgeous cities and go, okay, well, that would be illegal in Toronto, that would be illegal in Vancouver. And it makes you question why. Because anyone who's been to those cities, they're incredibly walkable, even if the public transit isn't that great. You have mixed usage on the ground floor of stores and shops and restaurants. That's the type of environment I would think you would want
Right.
in Canadian cities. And yet we seem so resistant to change. And so I think there's a lot to be learned from how these European cities developed before local planning boards had to approve the apartment size and ceiling heights of a development project. There's a lot to be said for giving property owners ultimately the right to decide what they want to build on their property in terms of density. I think we would all reap the benefits from it if we were to go in that direction.
One can only hope, and obviously this debate isn't going anywhere. It seems to be, as I said, it's busted through our national consciousness. We're talking about it. You've been talking about it. You were on my show talking about it months ago. So, David Clement, I just want to thank you for coming back on. Lots to talk about still, but we'll, I'm sure, have you back in the near future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really interesting guest, David Clement there, talking about the affordability crisis, housing supply, mostly supply rather than demand. We know we have high demand and we'll continue to have high demand, but it's a supply issue also in the residential lease or apartment sector as well. So lots to talk about still. I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the future as well, but thanks for watching today.